Hello and welcome. My name is Douglas Comer, and I'm president of the United States National Committee of the International Council on Monuments and Sites, or ICOMOS. We are then ICOMOS, the ICOMOS National Committee for our country. In the United States, our national committee is using as our public name World Heritage USA. This is to emphasize how we are now focused on the relationship between the set of cultural assumptions that we call heritage and how these have produced challenges that we have increasingly come to realize as being existential to humanity. Some of these have long been with us, such as the use of heritage to excuse social injustice and exclude certain groups, often, and especially those referred to as indigenous groups, excluded from the involvement in decision-making in the decision-making process that are used to determine policies and programs. There's a danger here for all of us, not only because such injustice will ultimately lead to social fragmentation and conflict. There's another danger, which is that we are losing the sense of connectedness between humans and what we call nature, the social construct. In place of seeing humans as part of a network of living things and acknowledging our obligation to maintain that network, we have chosen to construct a heritage that ignores that connection and treats nature as a source of materials that stoke the fires of industries that disproportionately profit only a handful of the billions of people on Earth. One of the artifacts of the colonialism that we in this country have inherited is the displacement of indigenous populations from their traditional homelands and then not heeding their voices. These voices often tell us that humans emerge from the landscape itself and that there is kinship among humans and all other forms of life. Let us begin to listen to these voices that we've shut out of the conversations that will plot our course into the future. The title of our webinar today is a unique partnership, Redwood, World Heritage Site, and affiliated tribes. What is happening at Redwood is, we can hope, a step toward beginning to listen. Notably, it includes formal agreements among state and National Park Service managers and Native American groups affiliated with these parks. And with that, I would like to introduce Destry Jarvis, our Vice President, who will moderate our webinar today. So thank you, Destry, and thank you all.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you for another in our webinar series covering the World Heritage Sites in the United States. I'm, as Doug said, Vice President of World Heritage USA. I have worked on national park issues for 50 years in my professional career. I would say that with regard to Redwood, I was deeply involved in the Redwood Expansion Act in 1978 as a lobbyist of Congress on that subject, among others. And then in the early 2000s, I worked for a decade for the Yurok tribe directly, whom you'll hear more from shortly. Our first speaker today is Steve Mietz, who is the superintendent of Redwood National Park, in its official name, Redwood National and State Parks. And Steve manages this World Heritage Site inscribed in 1980. And he brings decades of park management experience and has the pioneering responsibility for building a unique relationship with the culturally affiliated tribes that you will also hear from during this program. Steve?
Good morning, everyone, from a snowy Redwoods, or good afternoon or good evening, I guess, wherever you're listening in from. I have some slides I'd like to share to kick us off here. So welcome this morning. I'm really excited today to have both my state park partners and our tribal partners here today to talk. And so I'm going to kick us off with some ideas, and they're going to fill in a lot more later on. But to start out, why are we here today? Why is Redwoods a World Heritage Site? Our outstanding universal value is obviously the redwood trees, but also important is the coast redwood forest and the landscape that it's within. And it's going to be a lot of talk today about the landscape and the importance to our indigenous occupants who were here long before the park was established and are working with us to co-steward these lands. These lands are also recognized as having some of the tallest trees in the world and very impressive trees. That is part of what we'll be discussing today. So just jumping right in, here at Redwood National and State Park, we're very proud to be working with our tribal partners whose ancestral territories overlap the park boundaries and some of the protected lands within our park boundaries. And one of the more integrated programs that we have working within the park is the Condor program, which has been kicked off recently within the last year. We now have 8 free-flying condors among the redwoods, the most northernmost population of this highly endangered species. Really, in large part, and big thanks to the Yurok tribe, who led that effort to both bring back this highly endangered species to the redwood forest and to the northern part of the coast of the United States, as well as a cultural heritage for them, Pregonish in their language. This has just been a great example of when the park steps back from trying to lead and really lets the tribes come in and let their voices, their thoughts, their ideas about how to run the program and really let them take the lead. And we've been very supportive in co-managing this population and look forward to years and years of bringing back this really important both cultural and natural resource piece of the redwood ecosystem and cultural heritage of our area. But long before we had condors flying above the redwoods, we had rural renewal dances, jump dances every 2 years since 2012, working with Yurok families to bring back this cultural heritage within the park in these areas that are important to the tribe. And each year the dances get more sophisticated, they get larger, and it's really becoming a celebration. And we're just very proud to partner with the Yurok families to make sure that these important dances, that tradition continues and grows within our boundaries. Another important study that we're doing right now is we're listening to the Yurok tribe and looking at how traditional ecological knowledge can help inform our elk management. So we're asking the Yurok tribe, and we have a study with them to look at what are the traditional ecological knowledge related to elk management within the park to help inform our park management. And finally, with the Yurok tribe, there's many more, and Rosie will fill you in on, I'm sure there's so many projects to talk about, but one that I'm particularly proud of is the Yurok tribe themselves doing a lot of the large restoration work. 2/3 of our park has been previously logged, clear cut, and there's a lot of legacy roads, very sick, unhealthy forest. And we have a project, a large-scale restoration project that we partner with California State Parks and say the Redwoods League, bringing together public-private funding to restore tens of thousands of acres of land that need to be worked on. And so the Yurok tribe has been bringing back their expertise in their ancestral territory to partner with us and join us in this effort called Redwood Rising to help restore all this unhealthy landscape and bring it back to its historic glory. Shifting up north in the park, we work with the Tolowa Nation, and they're going to be talking later on as well, to construct a trail. And that's been a great way to kick off our relationship with them and help build capacity with them. And we look forward to, they were able to build this trail through a very archaeologically sensitive area, and having tribal members doing that work within an area that's important to both the parks and the tribe within their ancestral territory was very important to me. And I'm very glad that we were able to finally get that trail open. It's one of our most popular trails now, and is a great asset to the park. And now we have established a relationship with the Tolowa that they'll expand on some more later on in terms of, look forward to working with them more in the northern parts of our park. And finally, just want to touch upon, we've been able to, really important to me is to bring tribal voices into our interpretation, to our park programs that we reach out to folks. And so we've been able to bring some folks on staff working with our state park partners to bring them on staff and really put aside the National Park Service and the State Park Service messaging on Redwood Forest and really listen and let these tribal members speak from their heart and their tradition about what the forest means to them. And these are some of the most popular programs and really moving programs that we have within the park. And so it's really important that those voices are now being heard by the millions of visitors who come directly from tribal members. So a little bit of the nuts and bolts about how we get this work done. We have a general agreement with the tribes that we are very unique in that we work with California state parks as Redwood National and State Parks. So we jointly work together on our formal government-to-government relationship with tribes, which is very unique and allows us, again, to look at the whole landscape when we work with the tribes, and it really helps integrate our work. Also important is that we've established annual funding agreements actually all the way back with the Yurok tribe since 1999, and we're working on it with many other tribes under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. This allows us to move money directly to the tribes without having to set up complicated contracts. And we're able to move money quickly to address emerging projects, and it reduces overhead for both the tribes and the park and allows us really to work more and more as an integrated group to manage this landscape together. I'm going to pass it to Victor here in a few minutes, and he can talk much more about, California State Parks has a much more robust authority for co-management, and they've actually used this joint power authority to manage a visitor center. And they also have more flexibility with hiring, as I mentioned earlier, so they're able to bring on tribal members within our partnership to help have those voices said. And they've also have a plant gathering MOU with the Yurok tribe and other tribes they're working on within Redwood National and State Parks. And one challenge of that is that the National Parks Authority does not allow me as a national park employee to actually offer that same plant gathering MOU to the tribes. And so it is complicated for the tribal members to understand where the boundary is between national and state park lands, especially since we manage this as a joint landscape with state parks. And so that's one of the challenges we have with two different groups running this park and also trying to interface with the tribes. And we could talk, I'm certainly happy to take more questions, me and Victor, on some of these benefits and challenges of the partnership. And finally, I just want to point out that Redwood National Park actually overlaps with the Yurok Reservation for 1,400 acres. Finally, want to wrap up with just talking a little bit about some of the challenges that we face here in the Redwoods and as a World Heritage Site. One is, that you can see in the lower right corner, we have burl poaching, which is just an atrocious scar upon these trees, and just really hurts to see that these are protected trees for the world to enjoy, and they're hurt. The addressing to these is a lot of education. We work on law enforcement. We've been successful at prosecuting these folks, but again, through seminars like this, we try to raise the specter that this poaching is still going on. And so economic development within these very poor communities that are surround the park is part of the solution to this. Similarly, emerging issue we have is with tree climbing. And you can see here, this is not appropriate person up here in this tree, and they post this on social media. These are people who by profession call themselves arborists. These are folks who work on trees. They have skills to climb trees. You cannot just climb up this tree like you would an oak tree in your backyard. These are very complicated trees to get up into. And so we're working with the professional organizations to try to raise awareness about the damage to this unique ecosystem in the canopy of these trees that these folks are bringing, and that having these posted on social media just continues to encourage more and more folks to be doing this activity, which is really hurting this very, very limited and fragile resource that we have here. And finally, of course, climate change is an issue. There's a lot of unknowns there. We don't know what the impact of fog, where half of the water that sustains these trees comes from the fog in the summer. We don't know the impact that climate change will have on that. As you can see here too, wildfire has come to the southern part of the range down in Big Sur, California. And so we're seeing the future of what we might see here in the northern part, which is the stronghold of the remaining old growth forest. This might be our future in terms of wildfire, and preparing for that and building resiliency into the forest is part of what we're working with tribes and our state park partners to do. So with that, I will hang out and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Steve. That was terrific. Our next speaker, Victor Bjelejac, is the district superintendent for the Northern District of California State Parks that includes the Redwood State Parks. And I just want to emphasize the significance of the extent or depth of this agreement between national and state parks. I believe it is the most extensive or expansive or collaborative such federal state partnership anywhere in the country. And it allows shared space, shared maintenance yard, shared staff, and the exchange of knowledge and so forth. And it is a really wonderful thing. And we're really glad to have you with us, Victor. So please proceed. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Realize this is an international audience, and we think about these resources that were, mandated and take on as a life way to protect. We talk about these federal and state organizations and the authorities they have and relationships they have for co-management of these areas and protection of these areas. One of the things that I struggle with, we look at these heritage sites and we're looking at these resources that were managed for thousands of years by people. What Europeans came into and Western culture came into was a managed environment. Through our actions and really extraction industries, we've impacted a lot of environments to the detriment of those environments. With national parks, we have authority, as a state park authority that doesn't exist anywhere else in the United States. We co-manage, we manage these as teams of professionals. We share resources. We use whatever authority would be most effective for protecting those resources, whether it's national policy or state policy. We're flexible, nimble, all of those things. The animals that are on these environments, the plants that are on these environments, and visitors to these parks don't really care about what the border says or what the border is. It's an artificial construct. We try and manage in a way that brings us together and to do actions that are best for the environment. We don't manage exotics to a border and then stop managing them, 2 feet away. And it's a unique perspective in that approach. One of the things that I really want to highlight that's been neglected in these relationships are Indigenous people and the original stewards of these lands. I've got a geography that has 22 state parks, runs about 250 miles north to south. There are 14 federally recognized tribes within that territory. When these parks were created, when the authorities were granted, folks weren't thinking about original stewards. I see nowhere in our original legislation, in our original creation of the state park system from 1928, where Indigenous folks were consulted on what these environments should look like, what land should be protected. And really, our approach that we've been taking at North Coast Redwoods is to engage Indigenous people where they haven't been engaged before. It's really about establishing relationships. Tribes have lots of professionals, they have lots of traditional folks, and they haven't had a say in what goes on in our parks. A lot of Indigenous folks looked at a state park or a federal park and say this is an area that we've been excluded from practicing our culture in or practicing gathering our medicine in. And what we've really tried to do on these, national or international heritage sites is bring in those original stewards. I've had people, Indigenous folks, school me on when you look at a redwood, you should be thinking about Indigenous people from whatever that geography is. And it's a different worldview. It's a different mindset. We are agencies. We work by authority. We work by policy. We work by law, and we try and manage that way. What I've been trying to do is use those authorities that exist or push for new authorities that allow for Indigenous people to once again come onto their homelands and practice their cultural traditions, whether it's from plant gathering, whether it's from contemporary ceremony, whether it's on how do you manage an area for what species of plants. We have agreements that we've entered into. We have government to government relationships with Indigenous tribes. And when we enter into those relationships, I try and honor it as a sovereign nation and as a government. We have a co-management agreement that's in place with the Yurok tribe on Stone Lagoon. And that's somewhere where I use the highest authority that I could within, state sanctions to enter into an agreement through a joint powers authority. That's a government to government relationship. We have a lot of programming going and a relationship change that we're asking our Indigenous neighbors to advise us on how to better manage this. How do you relax authorities or use authority to give people access for traditional cultural practices, just for being in these places that they were excluded from? And it's really about establishing relationships. You think about agencies and, name your regulatory agency. You don't go to the regulatory agency. You have somebody there, you have a name there, you establish a relationship, they have a role, and you start to have conversations about doing good things for the protection of resources. I've had a mutual friend of Rosie and myself, but Elder, who talks about when you're looking at these lands and these landscapes and saying, I know these lands because they're intimate with them and they know me. And when you think about managing lands as if all things are important, no matter what they are, whether it's flora, fauna, geology, and that they're all part of a system, it's a different way of thinking. It's a different worldview. And as an agency representative to think that way, it can be challenging with some of our authorities, but it's also having knowledge of those authorities and allowing folks to experience those lands. The benefit of having Indigenous people telling their stories on these lands, managing these lands, giving authority for cultural traditional practices on these lands, all that does is bring enhancement. We really think of from a California state perspective that having Indigenous folks on our lands is a benefit, whether it's practicing this, that, or the other. Truly having Indigenous people within the parks is a benefit. And I think that other folks will elaborate on that more. But when you think of resources that are within parks, Indigenous people have been restricted from accessing Redwood. We have storm events, we have blowdown of redwood trees. When they cross highways, when they cross paths, we do what we can to open them up again. Typically, we would take those pieces of wood or bolts of wood and store them away somewhere and do dimensional lumber or something for trail projects or split rail or something. We've been able to use authorities to get some of those wood materials and other flora available to tribal members for traditional cultural practice, tribal members and governments. And that's been something that's been an enrichment. There are, over the last 6 years, probably another 8 canoes that have been created and used in contemporary ceremony from blowdown that we've had in the park. So we think of the protection of these resources, but you also have to think of how these resources were traditionally managed. These trees weren't impacted and put on the ground as they were available to folks and as they self-selected to go down. Traditional people use these resources in a respectful manner. And I think that really what Steve has talked about the impacts of poaching and poaching of trees for recreational climbing and thrill seeking. And you really have to think about coming into these areas with respect and coming in these areas with an eye for you don't have all knowledge, and an eye for who really needs to be at the table for what goes on in our public lands. And I think that we've made good strides towards doing that with our Tolowa neighbors, our Yurok neighbors. And it's something that's brought enrichment to myself, enrichment to the folks that are involved in government that have some responsibility for managing these parks, but also in the relationships and the change relationship where folks of indigenous background can look at their homelands, ancestral homelands, and feel a part of it and feel welcome. And if we do nothing else, that's a very important aspect of how do we protect these resources. Well, you make the original stewards of these lands a part of the management of these lands and a part of the experience.
Thank you very much, Victor. You are clearly a passionate professional, which I love to see. Now we're going to shift gears slightly to the other side of the coin, so to speak, and have representatives of the two principal federally recognized tribes associated with these parks tell us their perspective on this World Heritage Site and the resource and values that they have known for centuries in this place. So we'll start with the Tolowa tribe. Cynthia Ford is the preservation officer, and she's accompanied today by one of her tribal council members, Jaytuk. And I think, reflecting on what both Steve and Victor have said, let's hear it from your perspective. I know there are these relationships, these professional and cooperative relationships. There's also, a indigenous set of values here that the public, the visitors to these parks, generally don't appreciate unless they're informed along the way. And your managing of the Stone Lagoon Visitor Center is one way to get that moving in the right direction, I know. So please, Cynthia, please start us off here.
Dalaha, Shahushi, Jaytuk, Steinruck. Hello, and my name is Jaytuk Steinruck, and I'm on Tolowa Dee-ni Nation Tribal Council.
Dalaha, Shahushi, Cynthia Ford. I'm the Tribal Heritage Preservation Officer for the Tolowa Dee-ni Nation, and we wanted to share a brief history of the Tolowa people today and some successful examples of overcoming the challenges and barriers of working together to manage this landscape. So the Tolowa Dee-ni place of genesis in the center of our world docket is on land currently under the jurisdiction of the California State Parks. Central to our genesis is the Guscuti, or the white redwood, and the redwood landscape and ecosystem. The Tolowa Dee-ni have been an integral part of this ecosystem. We fish, hunt, gather, other forms of harvesting. These are all central to our subsistence, our cultural and our spiritual being as Tolowa Dee-ni people. I did share here an account of our Tolowa Dee-ni genesis because this is where we are taught how to care for and steward our landscapes and what is customary for us in this landscape. Since contact, our ancestral lands have been dramatically altered, and the majority of the redwood ecosystem now exists within the Redwood National and State Park system. And right here, I just wanted to share an image of our ancestral territory in what is now northwestern California and southwestern Oregon.
The Tolowa Dee-ni Nation and the Redwood National and State Park are engaged in an official government-to-government relationship to maintain meaningful partnerships as mutual stewards of the Tolowa Dee-ni ancestral lands. our goal is to inform stewardship and maintain our connection to our ancestral lands. This is informed through, as Cynthia said, through our Genesis and outlines customary laws and uses of the landscapes. The Constitution of the Tolowa Dee-ni Nation and the nation's tribal environmental plan and our harvest title. This relationship is facilitated by the nation's government and staff through consultation, collaboration, and coordination with Redwood National and State Parks to partner and implement the following types of activities: restoration, resource and site protection, support and maintain access to high quality traditional foods and utilitarian materials, support access to cultural activities and customary uses of ancestral lands, and educational opportunities and learning exchanges, support and increase employment opportunities and workforce development. So here is a slide of our current tribal council at the Tolowa Dee-ni Nation. As you can see, it's all right, and the treasurer.
And so we just wanted to share images because I think they speak very powerfully to the kind of stuff we do. So here are some images of different activities, and this is just a small portion of how we work and collaborate with the parks here in our ancestral territory at sites for resource protection. We deal with a lot of climate change and impacts to our landscape because of that, restoration activities. And these are different ancestral villages located within the Redwood National State Park system here. One thing that we're seeing more of, and the nation is really thankful for, is the acknowledgement of our indigenous lands. Some places we are renaming or re-recognizing the indigenous names, but you'll see throughout the park system here is that we're starting to get our language and the names for our indigenous names to these places out in the system. And so we've been working with the parks to develop these signs and recognize those indigenous place names. On the right here is Seitre Gindamdun, which was actually a village that had a tragic history. And so we recently were able to rename this location and are very thankful for that. And we continue to get these signs out on trail systems and different places within the parks to educate visitors and recognize our history here. And then one of the important things Victor and Steve both spoke to is access to cultural resources. They're critical to us maintaining our daily life ways. And so I'm going to pass on to Jaytuk again to talk about the Redwoods and why they are so critical to us as people.
So we were fortunate enough to get an opportunity to get some logs from the state park through some blowdowns that happened about 2 years ago, and it shut a road down in a place called Stout Grove. And so with the help of Victor and the superintendent of the state parks, we made an ask to see if we could get this wood given to us. You know, we of course had an agreement, pretty much handshake, and we made it happen with the help of some outside contractors and then the national park employees to get those logs moved and the road back open for the visitors of the park. And then in turn, we were able to bring back a redwood dugout carving activity with our folks here in Tolowa Dee-ni territory. Since, you know, we had lost all of our canoe builders, so with a friendship and relationship that I have with a Yurok man named Dave Severance from years ago, he always said, if you're able to come across the log, I'll help you learn. So we are now bringing that knowledge back to our place and learning, as you can see in the pictures, with our youth and elders that come out and just see the activity going on. So the picture on the left is when we first started. I believe it was in June, and we are able to get 2 canoes from this log. So we are grateful. We are very happy. It's a good time that we're bringing this back, and appreciative of it.
And so we just want to quickly share some other things. The ceremony and cultural activities that take place within the park system. This is our Shukminali, or salmon ceremony, that we hold within the state park. Candlelight vigils are something, one of the areas within the system here is the site of a Tolowa massacre, which is the 2nd largest recorded massacre in United States history against Indigenous peoples. And so we hold events like this to heal with the greater community and also celebrate our resiliency and our current existence here in the landscape. So these are really important activities that happen, and we're thankful to collaborate and access the lands to continue these traditions and new traditions. These are images from the Grove of Titans. This is an example of resource protection due to human impact and people kind of not wanting to stay within the rules here. The largest redwood trees here were really critically endangered. And so we worked as a group and partnered to build a trail to protect those resources in redwoods, but also use it as an educational opportunity to talk about the ecosystem, the wildlife, and the flora and fauna that exist within this landscape. And then we want to talk real quick about employment opportunities and workforce development. Steve really talked about trail construction and stuff, but seeing our local tribal citizens out in the landscape doing the work, these are great opportunities. We continue to find ways to support and increase these opportunities. In the center, you'll see here one of the summer interpretive staff for the parks, as well as other our tribal neighbors to the south. Our youth work in the summer and they interpret themselves and work with the public and talk and teach from their perspective. And so these are really great opportunities. And then just a few things we wanted to leave you with. How can you be an ally? You know, be aware of the history of the people. It's long, it's complex. Acknowledge the land that you're on, seek consent and permission, and responsibly enjoy your time. We want to keep this a healthy landscape and everyone to have a good time, but your activities can have a serious impact, and we want to all work together to be stewards of this land. And that is it for us today. Thank you for this opportunity, and good to see you all.
Thank you very much, Cynthia and Jaytuk. That was great. I want to say a word which we'll get into in the Q&A maybe a bit more, but you may know and you may be using, but there is a federal statute and funding source for an Indian Youth Service Corps that each federally recognized tribe can participate in and get some additional funding for tribal youth to do service on tribal lands or federal lands on an ongoing basis. And I, with another hat on, I work for the National Association of Service Corps called the Corps Network. And there's a whole group of people that are actively pursuing expansion of that program to more and more tribes. Our next speaker, our last organized formal speaker is Rosie Clayburn, who is the Tribal Heritage Preservation Officer and Director of Cultural Resources for the Yurok tribe. The Yurok Reservation runs from the mouth of the Klamath River upriver 50 or so miles to the confluence with the Trinity River on both sides of the river. And it's a place of very special qualities to the tribe. I think Rosie, it would be great if you can put this into a tribal perspective and the relationship or needs for expanded relationship, perhaps, with Redwood National and State Park. So welcome, Rosie, and please proceed.
Thank you. The Yurok tribe is the largest tribe in California population-wise. We're situated up here just south of our Tolowa neighbors. So we're just a little bit south of the Oregon border. Yurok has always maintained our homeland, so we were never removed. We have a very unique relationship with this landscape. Yurok tribe has always been federally recognized, since the 1850s, but actually formed our own government in the 1980s in a constitution in 1993. So for Yurok having a constitution and, that sort of Western government structure, we're fairly new. In our constitution, Yurok people and, my ancestors and, people who had this role before me and leadership, outlined really big priorities for the work that we do. One of them is to acquire all of Yurok ancestral territory. And, that isn't something that Yurok people are shy about talking about. The Redwood National and State Park, a lot of it is in our ancestral territory and contains a lot of our cultural sites, our ceremonial sites, our gathering areas, and places that we call home. They are not places that we, left despite, different management. And, one of the things that, I want to highlight about these partnerships is, we talk about the great stuff that happens now, but these weren't always the cases. This was a really tough relationship to navigate. Yurok people and, the government, and they actually, fought against a lot of the expansion of Redwood National and State Parks in our territory because they were worried about the management and the erasure of Yurok people and management types from the landscape. They were worried about access. And those are all things that I've seen in my lifetime struggle for. I know that there is some, things highlighted, but those, it's important to recognize the history and it's important to recognize the struggle that it took to get these things off the ground. I think about condors. That's something that a group of our elders started back in the day, in the early 2000s, 1990s. And they started with fundraisers, with selling hats with condors on them or, even bake sales or, just simple raffle things to start to get this project off the ground. And, it's something that we fought hard for, and we were able to bring along our partners to actually make it a reality. But it wasn't an easy task. It wasn't an easy feat to do. And I like to give homage to the people that came before me who persevered and didn't take no as an answer. I think that has a lot to do with the way that these projects happen, is that Yurok people in our neighboring tribes never take the answer no. And we push those boundaries. When we brought back the Chapek, the jump dance ceremony in 2012, that was a really unique thing. It hadn't been done in over 150 years, both by attempted genocide, the removal of Yurok people from the landscape from those particular villages along the coast where that dance happened, to ownership. And, the conversations that we had with our, state and federal partners at the time were, where can we walk? What are the impacts going to be to the archaeological site by the ceremony, even though the archaeological site was created by Yurok people for those ceremonies? How much vegetation removal can we do? The snowy plover down on the beach, what we're worried about, Yurok impacts. And, even one of the questions that was brought up about reintroducing the condor is what impact is the ceremony going to have on the condor for noise level? And so, I'm not highlighting these to be negative, but I think it's to be realistic about the conversations and the history of this. We're in such a different place now, especially with our state park partners. And, I think Victor alluded to it a little bit. It's about relationships, and it's about the willingness of the agencies and the leadership within those agencies to really hear voices and to hear Indigenous people say, this is our land. This is where we come from. We have managed it. The places that you manage now, and the reason why they look the way they do is because of Indigenous management. We have great big redwood trees. We have, some of the most phenomenal, and we're famous for that. I mean, obviously, we're here talking about a World Heritage Site, and, they're world famous. And the reason why they're world famous isn't just because redwoods were left alone. Redwoods were managed by Indigenous people. The understory was burned. Trees were thinned, and so that they could get proper light and proper water for them to grow that large. And so, recognizing that really unique relationship. And, as Steve mentioned, that Yurok has done restoration work within the parks. That's something that we've done on our own homelands. And, we've been very successful in watershed restoration. Our fisheries program is one of the most robust in the state of California. And we are the most robust on the Klamath River drainage where our homelands are situated. I oversee the Chapet Alqueta or Stone Lagoon Visitor Center. And, that was used. There was no laws that had to change. There was nothing, no policy, nothing that had to change in order to make that a reality. For the Yurok tribe to be the first tribe in the state of California to operate a visitor center within the state park system. And, I like to recognize that because I don't want to be the last. We just want to be the first. And we want to see this emulated across the state and in other parts of the United States and everywhere where Indigenous people are able to tell their own story. When I think about the visitor center and when we were working on it, our tribal membership started coming into that building. And, it has a unique history. And, it used to be the Little Red Hen, which was a bar, restaurant, store. And, most of our tribal membership had never been into that building as a state park building. And that shows you how state parks and, national parks were not created or inclusive for Native people. And, as we started to be more of a voice there, and we have Indigenous people working for the state park system, and we're there now, our membership has increased, and we're getting visitors from our own community. And, to me, that's what's important, is making sure that people know that these are places that are for them. And, even though we might go there, you never feel like the buildings or the actual infrastructure with state parks is for you. These are places where you get in trouble for gathering. These are places where you are ran out for doing things that you have always done or that your family has always done. And, through leadership of both Victor and, the state park director, Armando Quintero, we've been able to, put an MOU in place that allows for traditional gathering within all of the state parks of our ancestral territory. That's huge, and these are places before that we couldn't gather without getting a permit. And that's not something that, our tribal membership was so excited about doing. And, when I got to tell a lot of our elders or our people who gather, one of the first things they said is, what, I don't have to sneak around anymore? And I said, no, you don't, you're good. And, part of traditional gathering, hunting and fishing is actual management and getting our partners to understand that. And so, I think that there's, I got my warning. So I think there's a lot more that we can do. There's a lot of things we're doing with the state park, and I'm honored to do that. And I think, for me, the biggest highlight is what really co-management and co-stewardship looks like. We kind of throw those words around a lot, but what that really means is actually listening to tribal people and involving them in every step and giving them decision level making authority. It's not just a consultation. It's just not checking a box. It's not talking to or sending a letter or, doing simple consultation. What it is actually decision level making authority. And it is recognizing that these are still traditional homelands of Yurok people and other Indigenous people. And so I'm going to stop there and I'll be around for the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Rosie. That was terrific. Welcome back, everyone. If you would just, everybody turn your mics and your screens back on. And we're going to add, I think they're still around, Leonel Arguello and Karen Grantham to the discussion. They are the resource management staff of Redwood National Park, and have some, if we get into the resource details here, which we might very well, we may call on them for additional comments. But this was exactly what we wanted to hear, I think, from all of you. So I guess I would start off with one question that any or all of you could answer if you wish. And that is this looming opportunity, I might say, from a national perspective for co-management and or co-stewardship. And I don't want to go into too much of the weeds on this, Steve and Victor, but under each of your respective state laws, there is a difference between co-stewardship and co-management. And to the extent that you are collaborating, I suspect that you have the ability to make them as similar as possible, I'll put it that way. But it may not yet go as far as Rosie was suggesting is the desirable end. I know, I'll just give one example. When I first started working for the Yurok tribe, there is a tradition of surf fishing, net fishing in the surf on the beaches of the park, which the tribe could not get a permit to do because they were all taken by commercial fishermen. We got an act of Congress passed to make sure the tribe could get a permit, and they did, and they fish. But at least at that point, and this was admittedly 15 years, nearly 15 years ago, the tribal members were not allowed to dry their fish on the beach as they traditionally did on racks, because they could take advantage of the salt air to produce a better drying effect on the fish. They had to take them off the beach, upriver, where the drying capability was not as good. That may sound like a very minor issue, but I think the park, both parks systems have come to recognize that this traditional knowledge and traditional practice has value for the park as well as for the original peoples. So please, whoever wants to jump in first, I'll try to orchestrate the flow a little bit here, but somebody jump in and get it started from your perspective.
So yeah, so I think just generally to address what Destry was saying is I think that, yeah, what we're seeing now is both Victor and myself looking at the current authorities and interpreting them in the most open way to engage the tribes within their ancestral territories. Like Rosie said so eloquently, like hearing the voices, hearing what the tribes want, and trying to find ways to make that work. It's a change in attitude. We don't have the change in authority that we're really looking for. And state parks has a lot more authority than national parks has right now. That may change. But in the meantime, we're going to do what we can, where we can, to continue to work with both the tribes here and the other tribes that have ancestral territory that overlap our parks. And I think it really is key to, it's a lot about listening, and it's a lot about also just letting go of control, of just saying, this is not our land to manage. This is a land that we manage cooperatively with California state parks and the original indigenous people. And we're going to find a path that all of us feel like we're managing this together. And that's really going to get us to the best solution in the long run.
And that, to add on to that a little bit, and Cynthia and Rosie, just jump in anytime you want on any of this stuff. In Gold Bluff Beach, when park was established in relationship with Redwood National and State Park was established, 3 state parks, 1 federal park. There was mention in some of the original language about giving Indigenous people access for traditional cultural practices. And a lot of that stuff went away. And it went away because people weren't reading the original documents. They found it inconvenient to do so or didn't want the bother. And that's being kind of crass, but that's the reality of it. And you also have to look at this, and people would manage these lands and manage access to it, saying, well, if we let one person go down on the beach and access this area and do this activity, then we're going to have to let everybody do it. And my perspective on that has been, that isn't so. Indigenous people have a unique relationship to these landscapes and to these lands. These are homelands for them. Genocide was practiced. Forced acculturation was practiced. The seizure of lands, the making illegal of traditional activities was put in place, and exclusion and separation from culture was the norm. So when people say, well, how come these Indigenous folks can do this or can do that? And why can't I, as a California citizen, 1 of 40 million, do those activities? And I mentioned the history that Indigenous people on the West Coast have suffered. And I said, when you have those same, that same history and those same struggles, you too will have access as Indigenous people do. And it kind of cuts it out, but it's really welcoming the original stewards back on these homelands. As Rosie had said, to have people that have, ridden by their parks all of these lives and never felt that they were a part of it, to have them coming in and the enrichment that gives to everybody, community members, visitors, and everybody, it feels right. It feels that that's how it should be.
And again, I don't want to get into the weeds too much, Steve and Victor, but there is a bit of difference between the 2 agencies' gathering rules for tribal gathering purposes. I do know that because I was part of it in the Clinton administration, we started an attempt to promulgate a gathering rule that didn't get finalized until the Obama administration, when my younger brother was director of the Park Service. The lawyers went through all kinds of convolutions and twists and turns to get to a point where they could say there is a difference between a tribal person gathering and anyone else gathering. And that is the most important distinction, I think, that lets this proceed. I know the Park Service has some review procedures and some permitting that I think Victor doesn't require in advance of gathering. But anything else that either of you want to say about the authority and the practice of traditional gathering? And Cynthia and Rosie, if you want to jump in on the receiving end of this, please do so.
Let me say one thing really quickly. You think of a natural resource program, and you think of protection, and you have professionals that are in there from a Western cultural perspective, and they have ideas about what that looks like. And a lot of times it's laws, policies, procedures to restrict access to things. When we opened up gathering policy throughout, the North Coast Redwoods District, I went to Natural Resource Program Manager and I said, this is what we're going to do. And folks are going to come in and they're going to get traditional cultural materials, and we're going to allow that. And the caveat is, and if there are, and if we start to see impacts, then we'll have a discussion about that. But we're not going to put those restrictions in place before there are these detrimental, air quotes, detrimental impacts. And all we've seen is respectful stewardship of the land. In the 6 years we've been doing it, nary a complaint from natural resource professionals that there are impacts.
Any thought there, Rosie or Cynthia, on the recipient end of your rights?
I think, the state park, it's actually kind of amazing to me that we were able just to get this gathering MOU through in the last year, even though we literally changed no law or policy. I'll say that again. It's about the willingness of the people who are in positions of power. And, it's such a change in the atmosphere and in, what that relationship looks like and how we're working together. We do have some work to do on this national park side, and there's some great examples that I'm learning about, that are happening in other parts of the country. And so, I'm excited to try to see, how those are implemented in ways that we can make them happen here. And so, I think that, there just has to be that willingness. And as far as, if we have the people who want to do that, if we have to change policy, if we have to change law, Destry, that Yurok doesn't shy away from that fight. And we'll take that head on with our tribal partners and our neighbors. So
in some ways, it's wonderful that Steve and Victor are where they are, because the leaders of those respective agencies up there haven't always been as receptive as these two managers are. I remember about 5 superintendents ago at Redwood National Park, the rule was if a redwood fell across the road, the tribe could have a piece of that log that was equal to the width of the road, which wasn't long enough for a canoe. And I think things have improved, shall we say, since then on that score and others. I'd like to hear from Lionel and Karen for a minute on the resource issues that Steve talked about. I mean, Steve, you, of course, jump into this too. The burl poaching, and particularly the more recent episodes of this recreational climbing, adventure climbing that goes on in the higher elevations of those redwood trees. It is not just damaging, but ethically, aesthetically, environmentally harmful. So what's your thoughts, and how can we and others help with this issue?
And I'll add disrespectful.
Yes.
Very much so. Thank you, Destry. So the issue has been ongoing for quite some time now. Recreational climbing, really, we can't pin a time when it started, but I would say in the middle 2000s, with the publication of The Tallest Tree in the World and its notoriety that it had, with publication of some books and social media, and it's taken off since then. And it is frankly quite disturbing, the amount of damage they do on the ground to get to these sites. Not just the folks that are climbing, but then the folks that just want to go and see the tree, see the tallest tree, with good intentions in their head, but disrespect in the way they do it, with trash being left behind, and it's really something that we are working hard to try to figure out the best possible way to slow it down and to educate people that is not okay to come into a national and or state parks and think you have the right to just climb these old growth redwood trees any time of the year. There are proper methodologies available. If you have research, legitimate research, you can get a permit, potentially, but you can't just come in and with that, with the intent of just coming in to climb, and the damage it does. Recently, they climbed in the middle of the breeding season for murrelets and other listed species, and without a care, without even mentioning that's an impact. So it is quite disturbing, and anything that the World Heritage USA can help with in that regard. And I'll close by asking Cynthia and or Rosie to maybe say a few words, because really their voices are strong when it comes to these issues and what it means for tribal folks to have people coming in and climbing these old growth redwood resources.
Well, I think, you know, we mentioned it in our presentation, but the Guschuti is our creation story. It is our genesis. And, you know, Rosie talked about it earlier. We as Indigenous people have always interacted with this ecosystem in appropriate ways that promote the health of the ecosystem. And while we enjoy having people visit this place, you've got to do it responsibly. We're all stewards, we're all accountable, and these are the types of activities that are impacting our homelands in very negative ways. And unfortunately, there are also a lot of the projects that we have to do and the restoration, the protection that we have to do is because of these types of activities that impact our landscapes and our homelands negatively. So, you know, educate yourself, inform yourself, and be respectful of the homelands that you're visiting. And that's what we ask for.
Great. I do have a question here from one of our viewers wanting to know which of the parks have active interpretive programs that describe the histories of the tribal nations that still occupy or previously occupied these landscapes. I mean, and I might add, you know, which of them are you able to use tribal members for this interpretation?
I'll hit that, and I see Rosie coming off mute there. We do programming from Fort Humboldt all the way to the Oregon border with Indigenous folks. So we have Indigenous staff members, representative of various tribes, and they talk about what's real. We're at right now I'm at Fort Humboldt. That's a place that it's got a terrible history, and it was interpreted from a Western perspective. Grant was here, he drank here, and isn't that wonderful? We also talk about this place as a center for the genocide of Indigenous people this way. Even during the Civil War, when the feds weren't occupying, they had vigilante groups that occupied this fort and hunted down Indigenous people and captured and killed and all that other stuff. Now, come into this area and have an Indigenous person talk about that history. That's a different story. Rosie's doing, and I'll be quiet at that. We're able to rename a park that was associated with an individual who practiced genocide. We had folks that were promulgators of eugenics in the United States that we honored in monuments in our parks. We've removed those, we've changed those names, those stories, that importance and that heritage coming from an Indigenous perspective needs to be delivered by Indigenous people, not people that look like me. Talk about what's going on at Stone Lagoon, Rosie, with interpretation, and in the lagoons and at Sume. And
yeah, I think
Up in the
you know, the
parade.
state park, we have, you know, I have an employee who's an interpretation coordinator that's been working really closely with the state park interpretation team. We have several young ladies who are Yurok or descendant of Yuroks, especially from those villages that are in the state park. And so, you know, you could go to Sume State Park now, which used to be called Patrick's Point State Park, and we were able to reclaim the traditional name of that place and stop paying homage to a man who did some pretty atrocious things to Yurok people. And, you know, we really changed that dynamic there with interpretation. You know, before it used to be a place where, you know, you would go, you would get a non-native person, usually a volunteer, teaching you how to make Yurok dentilium necklaces like they used to do, you know, 200 years ago. And that's changed now to where you're getting accurate information, you're getting it from the people who come from those places, and you're getting their unique relationship. And, you know, it's not oversharing, because there are things that, you know, people don't need to know. And a lot of times, you know, when we told that information, it became part of the interpretation. And then you can go up a little bit farther into Stone Lagoon to where we actually operate the visitor center. And that is a whole story told from Yurok perspectives. And I wrote all the text in there. And that is literally Yurok's story told from the descendants of that place. And so, you know, that partnership has really changed. And And we're really excited about getting that. And, one of the things that I want to highlight about the land acknowledgement, and, land acknowledgement has become kind of like this politically correct thing to do. And the reason when we kind of got approached about doing land acknowledgement within the state park, we had to think about it a little bit. And what we said is because that land acknowledgement comes with teeth, it comes with backing from the state park to actually implement policies and decision-making authorities, that we were okay with it. It's not just like, oh, look at us, like, we talk to Indians and we talk to indigenous people and, check that box, but it actually has true meaning behind it. So that interpretation really has meaning.
That's great. I have what looks like one last question here. One of the viewers has an acquaintance who is a master arborist who he says would be appalled by this climbing activity in the Redwoods. And is there anything that we can disseminate to the arborist community that might give them pause to this disrespectful activity? And if so, Lionel or Karen, if you want to email me something that you have that you're suggesting be disseminated, we'd be happy to pass it along to all these places.
Thanks, Destry. Yeah, we're working on the production of a short video that we would like to be able to post on social media in response to climbing that will occur, because it will occur again. Yeah. And our intention is to invite the voices of our tribal partners to speak on this video about the subject. So at some point, there will be that to disseminate to the larger arborist community and others. It isn't
Great.
just arborists, but others.
Great, and we'll post it on our World Heritage USA website and also send it to our colleagues in ICOMOS UK or ICOMOS Canada or anywhere else that we may find arborists reside. I'm going to turn it back to Doug for a closing now, and I want to add my thanks to the great contributions that each of you have made. Urge you to keep up the good work. I think Stone Lagoon is not just unique in California, it's unique in the United States. I'm not aware of any other federal or state facility that is managed by Native people in the way that you're doing at Stone Lagoon. So we need to lift that up as an example to be emulated in other places, because there are lots of other places. Thank you all very much.
First, obviously, I want to thank our presenters. It was really, every one of the presentations was so engaging and so informative. It's really an honor to have you here, all of you, with park management and the indigenous groups. Just, I think the combination is just so instructive and so powerful. I'd like to invite everybody watching to visit the World Heritage USA YouTube channel. This webinar is going to be posted, I think, in a week or so, according to that's Caitlin's goal. So please feel free to share it with those who might find it informative personally or in their work. Increasingly, we're finding our webinars are used in university courses and continuing educational programs, and we really do encourage this. So please let us know if you'd like any assistance in doing this. And I should say we hereby grant permission for such use. So please Google World Heritage USA, visit our site. There you will find a link to this and on the YouTube channel, along with links to other webinars that I think would be interesting to many, many people. And then while you're there, I invite you to become a member as we pursue the development of a new inclusive heritage that will bridge the nature culture gap that's developed rather artificially, promote social and environmental justice, re-engage with indigenous heritage groups, act in support of rejoining UNESCO, and support the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. All that we've talked about today are relevant to those objectives. So with that, until we meet again, please stay well and do stay in touch. And we look forward to hearing from you. So thank you so much.